Richard. Thank you. Good morning. If Scotland had been an independent nation at the time of the credit crunch and the meltdown around RBS and Bank of Scotland, how well would we have coped both financially and internationally?
How would an independent Scotland have coped with the financial crisis? Alex Salmond.
Well, the financial crisis, of course, encompassed many, many nations. I hope, and perhaps the most important thing, is that it would have been rather more prudent in our bank and financial regulation to avoid some of these problems in the first place. But Scotland could have coped, as all countries have coped. And I think it's important that we move forward in terms of looking at not allowing this recession to become a double-dip recession or to become into an even more serious problem. And that means that we've got to expand the economy. We've not got to waste things on things that don't matter, like $100 billion in nuclear weapons. We've got to invest in the skills of our people, and we've got to combine that talent and ingenuity with the great natural resources of this country and provide for ourselves a successful, independent future.
Thank you. Jim Murphy.
Well, I love my country. I'm patriotically Scottish. But one of the lessons we learned from the past couple of years is that we have been stronger and more stable because we're part of the United Kingdom. We had the biggest banks in the world based on our wonderful, relatively small country. And these are banks that, when they almost fell over, would have destroyed and broken an independent economic model. Now, all this talk about Iceland and Ireland and arcs of prosperity, we don't hear about it very much anymore. And I think there's nothing patriotic in saying that Scotland should be like Iceland. And as a Murphy, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening in Ireland, but I don't think we should mimic the economics of Ireland either.
David Mundell.
Yes, if this debate had been taking place 18 months ago, Alex Salmond would be telling us that Scotland should be joining that arc of prosperity, which is now an arc of insolvency. Scotland benefits in so many ways from being part of the United Kingdom, and the action which had to be taken to support the banks is just one example of that. And Scotland's economic recovery is also dependent on being part of the United Kingdom, and that's why in this British general election it's the parties that will form the United Kingdom government, Conservative or Labour, that offer the solutions that Scotland needs.
Alistair Carmichael.
The truth of the matter is we would have had two massive global banks with a small nation attached. You know, we've got to be real about that. But really, the significance is not what has happened, but how do we go ahead? And it frustrates me enormously that we still haven't got round to taking proper control of the banks, getting them lending to business, which is what we need in order to get our economy growing, to get jobs created again. We never again should allow ourselves to be held ransom by casino bankers. We've got to get separated the casino bankers from the retail bankers. We've got to get them lending. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Well, can I point out two things to my three colleagues? Firstly, let's talk about who led us into this crisis in the first place. It certainly wasn't caused by having an independent Scotland. London was in control of banking regulation and, indeed, the economic matter. So let's work about who was responsible for taking us into the crisis in the first place. And secondly, the arc of prosperity. I noticed that neither Jim or David mentioned a third country in that arc of prosperity, which is Norway. Norway, who's emerged better than any other country across the European continent from this recession. Of course, Norway was really fortunate. They had massive oil and gas reserves. Oh, if only Scotland had discovered massive oil and gas reserves.
Alex, it's not that long. It's not that long since Norway had their own banking crisis. Go back to the early 1990s.
And solved it.
Yes, and we will solve ours in time soon. But don't peddle the myth that just because they're Norway, they're somehow immune from a banking crisis. These things happen.
And we can't forget, Alex, that you said that HBOS had been brought down by spivs and speculators when it was quite clear that its economic model was entirely wrong. You can't run an economy on sound bites. You've got to have substantive policies, and the SNP simply don't.
I defer. I defer to the Conservative Party when it comes to knowledge of spivs and speculators, but I note today that the American government are publishing the emails from Goldman Sachs, which actually show that that institution was deliberately bringing down their own funds, which cost, incidentally, many thousands of people massive amounts of money, several hundred million from the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, if that action to actually destroy a financial institution to make a profit is not an example of spivs and speculators, then what on earth is?
After the 2 years that the world economy's had and the Scottish economy's had, I don't think the same old cliches apply. We've all got to do things differently. We were increasing taxes on those earning above £150,000. The Labour Party is doing things differently. The Conservatives seem stuck in the past, the kind of deep, savage cuts in public expenditure and haven't changed. But perhaps the party that's not changed its tune at all is a party that continues to say that Scotland, if only it was independent, if only Scotland broke away from the biggest trading partner, i.e. the rest of the United Kingdom, where we export more than we export to the rest of the world, that everything would be resolved. The economic case for breaking up Britain has never been weaker. That's not just the Labour Party that says it, it's the Scottish public say it loud and clear.
Well, I would love the Scottish people to get the opportunity to speak on the issue of independence, which is why we propose to have a referendum to allow the people to decide on these matters, opposed by all three of the parties.
I wonder when we would get to that as the solution to everything. Alex, you are the only politician on the planet that doesn't recognise that there are going to have to be cuts. You talk as if there don't have to be any cuts at all, and you're going to magic the money from oil revenue.
Let me list some of the things I would cut. I would cut £100 billion of a wasted and useless Trident nuclear weapon system. I would cut that.
And you're able to say that because you're never going to be in the position to do that.
I would cut your plans for nuclear dumps. I would cut the remnants of the ID card system. I would cut the House of Lords. I don't think we need to spend £100 million on that. And incidentally, I would cut the £10 million we spend on the Scotland office, which Jim presides over, which is the kind of remnants of London rule over Scotland. Now, there's a list of cuts that every one of us can support.
Am I the only person who listens to this all going on with a growing sense of frustration? The banks are going to be absolutely critical to getting our economy going, lending to small and medium-sized companies, which are the backbone of the Scottish economy. And what we really ought to be hearing from Jim and from Alec is, why is it that unemployment in Scotland is growing twice as fast as it is in the rest of the United Kingdom, and growth is growing half as fast? And why is it that the Royal Bank of Scotland was given a target for lending to business, which it missed by £16 billion, Jim, and absolutely nothing happened to them? Why have you not taken control of the banks you put our money into?
Mr. Salmon, your answer?
Well, I agree with Alistair on two things. I think he's put his finger on a very substantial issue, which is when the banks have moved into public ownership, then the very least you can expect is you get a flow of funds to business. That hasn't happened, and Jim's got a big question to answer. And the second thing I agree with Alistair about, when he said, yes, of course, an independent Scotland would have had problems and dealt with them like every other country in the world. What I don't accept is the gospel of despair from David and Jim that somehow Scotland uniquely wouldn't have been able to deal with the problems that every other nation on earth is dealing with.
I think it's essential in the way in which we have invested in those banks, the taxpayers of Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales. So together we have been much stronger as the four nations of the United Kingdom. We've stuck together, we've been stronger, and we're getting our way through this recession. But for all the talk and all the argument about the recovery, which of course has now begun, we have always got to remember, I think as Alistair pretty fairly alluded to, is that for many people the recession has just started. Those people who have lost their jobs, those small businesses who are finding it hard still to get loans from those banks, which is why we're going to continue to invest, and it is far too early.
Thank you very much.
To do
we're
as
going
David
to have to
would do
pause
and cut
for a
off the
moment
recovery.
here at the Scotland debate in Edinburgh. Lots more coming up in a moment.